Hello and welcome to Other Voices, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. Donald Trump has his first whistleblower case as President of the United States. About 6 months ago, a young woman, a National Security Agency contractor, much like Edward Snowden was, leaked to the investigative journal The Intercept an NSA document that purported to show evidence of Russian meddling in our elections, and specifically in local election software and with local election officials. Donald Trump doesn't have a big problem with this whistleblower, though, because it seems like not many people know about the case of Reality Lee Winner. We're going to try to change that tonight, and our guest, Jeff Patterson, is one of the people who's trying to make more public, the case of Reality Winner. Jeff, welcome back to Other Voices.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Jeff has spent the last 11 years, in fact, on just this kind of effort as director of Courage to Resist, which provides legal and other forms of support to military war resistors, most prominently among them Chelsea Manning. Jeff was the first enlisted soldier to speak out against the first Gulf War in 1990 when he refused to deploy to Iraq. And these days, along with Rainey Reitman and Trevor Timm, Jeff founded Stand With Reality to provide support to America's latest whistleblower, Reality Lee Winner, much as Courage to Resist stood with Chelsea Manning for many years. I want to start, Jeff, with your last visit here was about Chelsea's case, I believe. I don't remember exactly when it was, but several years ago.
It was a long time ago. Yeah. Chelsea Manning was arrested in May of 2010,
yeah.
And she just walked out of prison a few months ago. So it was a long 7-year stretch of protests and petitions and marching on the White House and traveling the country to wherever she was being incarcerated at.
Yeah,
so it was a long haul.
Yeah, I wanted to start there with not only with Chelsea's case, which ended up on a rather happy note, but how many military resistors has Courage to Resist worked with over the years?
We were founded, I would say, formally in 2005 when the Iraq War was first picking up, and we've worked on 40 military court-martials, meaning people were facing prison time, and
refusing to
deploy to Iraq, usually, and sometimes Afghanistan, and sometimes those individuals sought refuge in Canada. Some of those people were deported. Some of those people were allowed to stay. Other people simply came back from Iraq and said to themselves, "I'm never going to do that. I can't go back. I've seen too much death.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna survive, and I disagree with what's happening over there," and simply turn themselves in later and face the consequences of that.
So people take a lot of paths to, because as you know, it's not easy to refuse an order like that because you're facing a lot of personal grief.
Right, and the military has a hold on people's minds about you. If you get a bad paper discharge from the military, your life is over, for example.
Although, as we found out tragically, you can still buy a gun.
Yeah, you have to. Exactly. But right, but a lot of that's internalized as far as that guilt of letting your buddies down, and a lot of people I work with went through the Vietnam War as well, and you have that same experiences. You can totally disagree with the war, but yet the friends you trained with and lived with for years
are still friends,
and they're facing life and death situations, regardless of whether you politically disagree with the war and personally can't be involved.
Chelsea's case is the best known one, but I want to spend a moment before we get into Reality's case about how grassroots support, what you're trying to drum up, the demonstrations and stuff, how important a role that plays. What role does it play in these kinds of cases, or like with Chelsea's in particular? I think,
well, you know, I'm the project director of an organization dedicated to building that grassroots support, so I have to say it makes a big difference. But I've done this for the last 10 years because I've seen it make a difference. In my own case, I was facing 5 years in prison for speaking out against the first Gulf War, and it made all the difference in the world that people in the community came forward to support me, and not only you know, give me a pat on the back, but actually fundraise and find an attorney to represent me. And because of that, my jail time was limited. And once I got out, I relied on that community of support, you know, to move on from the military and try to make a life, you know, after that. One of the biggest cases prior.
I want to pick up on something you just said. How did that kind of public support shorten your sentence? Was it?
Well, I was facing 5 years in prison. And every one of these cases we do, and we've done almost 50 of them now, it's a different situation, meaning we're dealing with a particular prosecution team that's taking orders from a particular general. And sometimes that general is focused on deploying thousands of troops into a combat theater, and sometimes he's not. Sometimes he's dealing with troop shortages, and he's going to take every last person he can, regardless of medical conditions, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes the U.S. is building up towards a offensive or a surge, and sometimes they're trying to trim numbers. So every one of these court-martials happens in a slightly different context where the military has different objectives. So we try to figure out how that's going, you know, and try to find a strategy that's going to best serve that objective to minimize jail time. In my case, the military was trying to deploy a lot of people to fight the first large-scale war since Vietnam at the time, during the Gulf War in Iraq. And the community did protests right outside the base. And that made the military very nervous because the last time that happened was Vietnam. And that was a big sort of rapture in society of what people believed and what people were willing to do to protest and take a stand, from burning draft cards to marching against the war in the street, all pretty much unheard of for, you know, for a long time prior to that. Yeah. So now all of a sudden they're seeing the echoes of that. I was in Kaneohe Bay on Oahu in Hawaii. And obviously Pearl Harbor and Hawaii is a staging point for military, amphibious, and offensive forces still.
So, and the role of this grassroots support, again, going back to Chelsea Manning's case, I think that was really critical. I mean, because of the notice of what she released was pretty stunning. The content and how much attention it got paid to. Do you think this kind of broad popular support is what led Obama to a commuter sentence?
Well, absolutely, right? Why else would a president expend the political capital to do that?
At the end of his term.
At the end of his term,
didn't need anymore.
But still, you know, it was only because millions of people signed petitions, and you know, we took over one of his fundraisers.
Did you really?
And we sang a song about Chelsea Manning, and you know, and we watched you know, one of Obama's key people turn to Nancy Pelosi and say, "Did you do this, Nancy?" And Nancy was, "I don't know what the hell's going on."
You didn't pay $10,000 a piece to get in, did you?
We actually did. Well, we paid thousands of dollars to get in, and that's because a donor came forward and she had this vision that she was willing to spend 50 grand so we can have 8 or 9 people sort of stage this sort of protest in one of his sort of elite fundraising gatherings.
Yeah. And speaking of money, one of the key roles that you play with all these is fundraising for legal defense.
We do. We do a lot of these cases, and sometimes the difference between having an attorney and a roof over your head is, $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000. And we've done many of these cases for under like $10,000, where we have a significant legal effort that helps them in that regard, and we're able to hire psychiatrists to talk to the sort of the mitigating circumstances to sort of limit their jail time in that regard, and then also give some money to their family, because a lot of times they're young dudes with young families, a wife and kids, and all of a sudden the breadwinner of the family is in jail for 6 or 7 or 9 or 12 months. So we're usually able to help the spouse to sort of get by while they're in prison.
Well, that's all really important stuff. I do want to get to Reality Winner's case, but you're still in touch with Chelsea Manning? And
Chelsea's free, and she's going to be back in the Bay Area next week, I believe.
Oh, really?
It's called Aaron Schwartz Day.
That's right. I've seen.
So she'll be at that event.
She's coming out for that.
She's coming into her own. People have to remember that she had spent seven years of her life up until just a few weeks ago in confinement, sometimes under conditions that were described as torture by the UN investigators.
The UN,
so she's trying to find her own voice. She's trying to figure out who she is. And it's amazing, because it seemed like just a year ago, she would die in prison. So that's pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, and I think you told me there's a documentary coming out about her. Do you know much about that?
There is an Academy Award-winning production team is doing a documentary. The documentary started when she was in prison, and talked to a lot of our campaign staff. And when she was freed, obviously the documentary turned into something completely different.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a much happier ending to the story.
All right, great. Well, we'll look forward to her being out here next weekend and to the documentary. So let's get to the case of Reality Lee Winner. And
so the first thing is, that is actually her real name.
Okay.
She was born with that name, and her dad said he wanted a real winner in the family, and they named her Reality.
Yeah.
Reality Winner. So that's probably the first question everybody's thinking is like, what's her real name?
Yeah.
That's it, and she didn't choose it.
Yeah, when I saw that little entry on the standwithreality.org website, I thought, wait, why do they feel like they need to say that's really her name? So I did a search on Twitter on Reality Winner, and the right wing is all over it, that her name was really Sarah, or all these other things.
There's a lot of crazy stuff on the internet. So when she was initially arrested, people pointed that as it was a hoax or fake news, that this is not a real person, or it was a DNC conspiracy to make Trump look bad during that night's news cycle or something like that.
So give us a little bio about her.
Grew up, born and raised in Texas on the coast, near Corpus Christi, and she loves animals. She's super smart. She was the high school mascot, inside the costume, all this stuff. She joined the Air Force. She served for 6 years stateside. Was sent to Monterey to learn Middle Eastern languages, knows Farsi and a couple others. So, vegan, weightlifter. And I think she's somebody who, wanted to fight the bad guys in her own special way. And
she got into intelligence work in the Air Force.
Right.
Right?
She, just like Chelsea Manning, an intelligence sort of specialist. And, again, somewhat like Manning, began to see how futile and how devastating these wars are. It's not about us. It's not about good and bad guys. It's about innocent people being killed, and this is sort of like off subject and basically from my own discussions with her, but she was looking forward to like getting out of the Air Force and transitioning in some kind of like helping people in humanitarian kind of thing. So she was thinking like, well, the Peace Corps or anything, because she had never heard of any like progressive peace organizations like the Peace and Justice Center.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where her thinking is.
There is one in Austin, Texas.
So that's I guess that's who she is. Vegan, loves animals, very, very smart. But when she got out of the military, like so many young people, you don't really have a lot after you get out of the military, but if you're an intelligence specialist, you have a top secret clearance. And if you have a top secret clearance, there's people paying pretty good money for you to become a cog in sort of the NSA complex of hundreds of subcontractors.
Yeah.
And then she took that job. And
that was in Georgia.
And that was in Augusta, Georgia, working for a subcontractor for the NSA. And that's where the next part of the story comes. So she had access to top secret information. The government alleges that on the day Trump fired James Comey for the FBI and bragged that basically he's out of the woods and there's not going to be any investigations are over, and he meets with the Russians. A few days after that, it's like all my problems are solved now.
Yeah, he said it on a TV interview.
Right. So so it's important to remember those are the things that are happening when allegedly Reality Winner looked on the computers and started searching for Russia collusion, and things of this nature, and then allegedly found this document and sent it a couple days later to The Intercept. And then during her interrogation, the government puts forward that she claimed that this document, she was frustrated by what was going on, what she was seeing in society, and that this document should be public because it speaks to what's going on and what everybody knows. And here you have the president talking about he has no idea if the Russians actually did anything, but here's this document that shows that the NSA believed that Russian agents were spearphishing select officials of state elections. So the document itself doesn't prove that the Russians changed any tallies of any votes or anything like that, but it speaks to the fact that the NSA's best intelligence shows that they believe that Russian agents were spearphishing and trying to gain access to U.S. election systems.
Let's talk a little bit in detail about what's in the document, because I think a lot of people haven't gotten that from this story to the extent that the media has covered this story at all. So picking up on what you just said, the document does show, not that they changed vote totals or anything, but they had a very active program to try to get to registration software vendors, voter registration, and through them to local election officials. Flesh out the document a little bit so that people have a good idea.
Well, first thing I would say is you can Google the Reality Winner NSA document. You could read it yourself. It's only 4 pages. We're not talking about Edward Snowden's 500,000 documents. We're not talking about Chelsea Manning's 400,000 documents.
Yeah.
We're talking about a single document that's 4 pages long. That basically it does that. It describes the NSA's best opinion that Russian agents were spearphishing, trying to access these election systems, and it goes into some detail of what types of software, malware that they were trying to use to gain access. But in short, that's what it is. It's not anything more. It's not anything less. And some people fault that, well, she should have just dumped the entire thing, and there's probably more documents that show how they of how the NSA came to these conclusions. But I would ask, you put yourself in the shoes of this young woman who's trying to, basically, what can I add to the public discussion without actually harming the people I work for, without actually getting into real trouble, I guess is how I would say it.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to prison, but I want people to know that, our government really does think that the Russians were trying to hack our systems. And I think if you're that person, you're thinking, well, this document is very important, but it's not something that they're going to come and put me away in prison for the rest of my life, or something like that.
It's not revealing any secret methods or agents' names or anything.
Exactly. There's no informants or anything like this.
Yeah.
There's no. I'd say the government is going to try to prove that harm was produced by this document.
Yeah.
But you can read the document, and I think a reasonable person will see that it is what it is. That there is no secret information in the document. But the quirk is that she's being tried under the Espionage Act.
Yeah.
And in the courtroom,
which is from 1917 or something.
100 years ago.
Yeah.
Before the classified system of documentation was even invented. Right. So
the Espionage Act can't mention classified documents.
Because classified documents didn't exist back then, but the government's making that leap. But I guess my point is that Reality Winner can go before a jury, and the jury will never know what the contents of the document is. She'll never be able to, as things stand now, and the legal team is trying to appeal at every step of the way, but as things stand now, the case will be, did Reality Winner take a classified document, we're not going to talk about what it is, and give it to a person that was not authorized to receive a classified document? And the government's contention is, if that's yes, she's guilty, 10 years and a $250,000 fine. We're not going to talk about what the document is. We're not going to be able to talk about what the harm was to anybody. We're not going to be able to talk about, for the greater good, a public good defense. If the government has its way, it's just like Reality Winner took document X and gave it to person Y, and that's it. And a jury is going to decide her guilt on that, if things stand as it is now.
It sounds like she can't even really mount a defense that way. I mean, there are whistleblower protections. Can't she invoke those somehow in this? Well, you have the President of the United States saying the Russians weren't involved in the election. You have an NSA document that says they were.
And yet
isn't that the very definition of whistleblowing?
And that's why I spend my days, working on this, campaign. Yeah. I think it's important. And another aspect of why it's important is it's not just because a young woman is facing injustice. The world is really messed up these days, right? It's like, so it's hard for people to why should I care about this one person? There's plenty of people facing a lot of injustice. But the Trump administration and the Trump's Justice Department is turning a corner, I guess I would say, in that here's, for the first time, you have a person who's given one document one time to one media source as a contribution to a national interest story. There's no doubt about that. Russian interference in the U.S. elections is of interest.
And this should be.
Well, and here for the first time, the prosecution is going through with an Espionage Act prosecution in charging. In previous times, the Espionage Act was sort of trouted out as a stick, right? So hey, plead guilty to this lesser charge, or we're going to prosecute with this, and people would plead guilty, get a few months in prison. And that's, for people like John Kiriakou, who told the media of one of the FBI agents who tortured detainees in Guantanamo. He sort of let that out of the bag. He spent a few months in prison for that. Obviously, it was noteworthy, and obviously, I think John's a great guy, and I'm a friend with him. But he spent a few months in prison. But now, the Trump administration's, we want to make an example of whistleblowers, and we're going to use this case to show that for even the smallest whistleblowing crime, despite whatever defense you might have, we're going to go after her with the full weight. And if the prosecution's allowed to make this precedent with this case, there truly is no defense going forward for any national national secrets kind of person who has classified information. Maybe it's war crimes or like Chelsea Manning.
Yeah.
There's no defense. Whatever minor your leak is, if you are not an inside Washington person who's doing this on behalf of the government, which happens every day, but you are an outsider making the government look bad, your life is over. 10 years in prison, $250,000 fine, and you have
That's
no.
what she's facing.
And yeah, and you have no defense. As I described, you'd be like a star chamber kind of deal where you go in front of a jury and the jury has no idea what you're actually innocent or guilty of.
And when you say they can't introduce the document even when this goes to trial, and by the way, it's scheduled for March. Is it still for March?
Currently scheduled for March 19th. The prosecution is not turning over evidence in a timely way, so.
Big surprise there.
So it's likely go into the summer.
So the question of presenting evidence at the trial when it comes up, whenever it comes up, I was reading some at The Intercept about this, and they really are kind of making it so that even if it's like the document that Reality released is online, it's on your website, standwithreality.org. The New York Times, I think, posted it on their website.
Wikipedia has it as well.
Yeah.
So it's easy to find.
But the government is saying that's a classified document, so you can't introduce it in court, even though...
Right, it's technically a classified document, so technically it doesn't exist if you don't have a clearance to view it and a need-to-know reason to view it.
Yeah.
So the document officially doesn't exist, but the prosecution has gone further, and the judge so far has agreed with the prosecution that not only you can't, that Reality Winner can't talk about the NSA document that she may go to jail for 10 years for releasing, the defense can't talk about any of the 100 plus media articles that resulted from the document being released. And the defense can't talk about all of the government actions that took place to try to mitigate possible hacking attempts on systems. That there were many in 21 states that the first time election officials heard about Russian spear phishing and hacking was through not the government telling them, but through Reality Winner related document that appeared on The Intercept.
When her story hit the media,
right, so
that's when the state officials
right.
learned what the NSA had known for months.
Exactly. So if you're a defense attorney, you're like, well, my client, her actions resulted in the greater good. And then like these, you know, and then you might be able to call to the stand, you know, some of these state officials, like, and have them say, well, I didn't
really
know
glad
this,
she did that.
I didn't know this happened
Yeah.
until this document appeared, you know, in the press.
Yeah.
But no, that is classified as well. So we can't call on those people because we can't tell the jury that those things happen. So you can't talk about the document. You can't talk about the media reporting of the document. You can't talk about all the things the government did to mitigate its election systems as a result of the document being released.
She can't talk about her own motivations.
Well, and at this point, no.
Huh.
So.
Is there a way before this trial that the defense team can appeal this and
Exactly.
appeal to the judge?
Exactly. This is going to be a precedent-setting case, good or bad. We're hoping it's good.
Yeah.
And we have 7 attorneys that represent 5 different law firms. Some are based right there in Augusta, Georgia, and are local to the community. Others are experts in whistleblowing and the Espionage Act. So it's an impressive team effort, and we're publishing the court documents on a daily basis. Standwithreality.org if people want to
I looked, it's an incredible list
You
already.
can see the back and forth. There's 150 court documents, and a lot of them are very detailed briefs on what the Espionage Act was and what it's become and why it doesn't apply to this case. And the government obviously has its own opinions of why Reality is a very, very bad person. And Reality, the judge has formally ruled that Reality, quote unquote, hates America because during a private Facebook chat with her sister, Britty, Reality and Britty are talking about environmental issues, and Reality says, like, well, Americans use way too much air conditioning, and this is one of the, basically, and that's one of the things I hate about America is, like, we're basically indulgent, and not taking enough care of our environment and that kind of stuff. So, but literally on the basis of that kind of conversation taken out of context, the judge then makes an official declaration in his order that Reality Winner has admitted to hating America. And it's just such a leap that it's hard to even take seriously. And yet, it's important to understand that Reality Winner is in jail. She's been in jail without bail for 5 months now. Let's compare that to
That's where this the bail hearing is where this thing came up, right? About her hating America.
Exactly, and that's why she was denied bail. So let's look at Russiagate. We got Reality Winner held without bail because she's a flight risk, because she had a few $1,000s in the bank, and she went to Mexico for dental work because she lived near the border. So she's a flight risk for those reasons. But yet Paul Manafort, he has $100 million. He has 10 passport applications. He has 3 different passports with 3 different numbers, homes on different continents, and yet he's deemed not to be a flight risk that requires to be in jail. The same thing with Gates.
Yeah, he gets home detention.
There's a person, an alt-right activist, Mr. Lane is his last name. He recently murdered his father with a steak knife because his dad called him a Nazi because he's a Nazi. It's important to realize that Mr. Lane got bail. Days after murdering his father with a steak knife and basically still covered in blood, the judge is like, okay, $1 million bail. Reality's family was willing to put up $1 million bond. They had their ranch house in Texas and other money on bond, and they would have been prepared for that $1 million bond, but they didn't have a choice. But murderers, Manafort, Gates, all given the opportunity for bond and house arrest.
Well, you probably hear this a lot and you probably bring it up a lot, but I can't help but think about David Petraeus, this renowned general who, for an illicit affair, was handing over much more classified information than it sounds like Reality did, and I don't think he ever spent half an hour in a jail.
He was never in jail. He gave dozens and dozens of documents to his mistress in exchange for either a better book or in exchange for sex. The U.S. government has prosecuted plenty of people for trading secret information for sex. Going back to Sergeant Lone Tree, who's still in prison today for having a girlfriend in Moscow during the 80s.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then all of a sudden, General Petraeus, he gets a slap on the wrist, and he was seriously considered to be part of Trump's cabinet, after this happened. And yet, again,
he'd have been the only cabinet member convicted before becoming a member of the cabinet.
Right, which would have been more honest, I think, more transparent. But again, I want to ensure how outrageous Reality Winner not being allowed bail. And her not being allowed bail makes her unable to participate in her defense. She can't look at the documents unless she's literally in chains in a tiny room because all the evidence is secret. So she has to be taken to the secret closet, and she has to be in chains while she's in the secret closet. So it makes her not want to go through all this. So it makes her really unable to participate. Whereas Manafort, Gates are, able to do Skype, on CNN from their living room with an ankle bracelet and argue that their house arrest is far too severe and unfair.
Yeah. Is there any kind of appeal on the bail going on, or has that been pretty exhausted and there's no hope? Or
We are appealing to the Southern District Court of Georgia. So we're appealing to the district court, and that's why there's already 150 court documents. It's like we're going to appeal every aspect of this case, and that's critical in a case like this, because if the government has its way and we don't have a win in one of these appellate courts before the trial itself is kind of a horse and pony show of not being able to actually talk about anything substantial. So.
Talk just briefly, and then I want to move it along to what people can do to help it. The circumstances of her arrest, when the FBI came to her house. First of all, quickly, how did they identify her? And then she made no effort to hide that she did this, did she?
Well, the circumstances of her arrest, I talked about a little bit about the time frame of what was going on in society and what might have motivated her to do this. And when I say that, I assume she did it. I don't have any inside information.
Right.
But I also, and I'm unaware of anybody else who might have done it. But at the same time, she's pled not guilty to this. So that's why I was like, if she did it. I told you about, the FBI director had just been sacked, and it looked like, Trump thinking that he might just get away with not facing any consequences. And Comey, in addition to Reality Winner's document, Comey also leaked notes from his sacking with Trump. And it really was the Winner document and Comey's leak that really gave some backbone to the call for an actual investigation. So I think those things are significant to remember.
Yeah. And there was a question about whether she had been given a Miranda warning, told her rights when
she wasn't.
FBI.
And it, in America today, the police are usually allowed to get away with that. I was just reading about another article that somebody, a young person told the cops that they don't want to be questioned anymore, and he said, "Well, I want a lawyer dog," right? And then the appellate court just upheld the police, deciding not to provide a lawyer and stop questioning, because the police claimed that he was asking for a canine lawyer. So all I'm saying is that the Miranda warnings is something that the courts are allowing to slip and giving the police far too leeway. In Reality's case, it was the same thing. It's like, you're free to leave, except we have 10 armed men in the SWAT uniforms, blocking your way.
Yes.
And we have you backed up into a little corner, and we are now shouting at you to answer our questions.
They were shouting at her.
Yeah, you have very large men and tactical military weaponry.
Yeah.
And she has this little flat on a rural Georgia street.
They took 10 people in to raid her place?
They did. 10 males.
Jeez.
10 men. They had sat her down in a back dark corner and started basically it was an interrogation. And she was, the police now say, well, she could have left if she wanted to. But it was absurd. They weren't going to let her go anywhere. And in that context, the government's transcript of that says that she eventually said, yeah, I did this. I saw what was basically. I didn't understand why these things were being talked about, and I didn't understand why this document shouldn't be part of the public discussion, basically.
Yeah.
In that context, the police agents were saying things like, "Well, politics are crazy these days. Nobody would blame you for wanting to like expose some of this crazy stuff, And they were kind of like egging her on. So that was the context of her quote unquote confession. The defense is now arguing that that shouldn't be allowed based on she was never given a Miranda rights. She was never told she had access to a lawyer. But I don't think that's what.
So the prosecutor will get to introduce that as evidence, but she can't basically introduce any of her defense as defense.
Basically, right.
Yeah.
But I don't think that this case is going to hinge on that. This case is not a whodunit case. It's not like Reality did or did not do this. It's about, does the Espionage Act apply to somebody who, for no benefit and for the public good, provides information critical to understanding of how our democracy should work and decisions that the population should make, and that's it. And
that's why you're involved in this.
Yeah, and that's why I'm involved with it, because if we lose this case, there really isn't, whistleblowers don't stand a chance going forward.
They don't have much chance now, but certainly it sounds like if this sets a precedent for future whistleblower cases.
Yeah, and also I want to make a point, like she's already spent 5 very hard months in a very small, very rural Georgia county jail.
She's in a county jail, huh?
And it's a very small jail. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not made to hold people long term. But yet, because she's being outsourced from the federal detention system into this county jail, she could be there an entire year. Anyway, she's having significant health problems. She's a vegan, so she's living off bread and cans of peas from the commissary. She was a weightlifter when she went in. So, being a vegan weightlifter, that diet is challenging even, for anybody on the outside.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say, oh, poor Reality, but it's a tough situation while, all these other people are allowed to organize their own defense from the outside and be on CNN to tell about their unfair treatment.
All right. Well, I want to get to our audience real soon, but for their questions and comments, but let's get down to the gist of what you're doing. How do people go about supporting Reality Winner and helping you support Reality?
Well, this is where I talk about the website, standwithreality.org. This defense team is significant. Their effort is massive. They're working for sort of pennies on the dollar, so to speak. So we've been able to raise and contribute like $35,000 to the legal fees for Reality, and we're not even near the end of this case. So I'm hoping people go to the website, learn about this case, understand why it's important, help us contribute to the defense effort. You can follow the case, sign up for the weekly emails that sort of sum up what the issues of the case are. And then you can do simply like person-to-person things, like write Reality directly in jail. Send her a postcard. Her birthday's coming up. Send her a birthday card.
That's a good idea. I think we have actually for the TV broadcast the address to write to her, and hopefully it is appearing right now. I won't know until I see the tape of this. But
well, if it doesn't, standwithreality.org.
Standwithreality.org. Anything else? Are there petitions, any demonstrations coming up, anything like that?
Absolutely. We got veterans marching. She just got out of the Air Force a few months ago. So we have people in veterans parades across the country, doing little contingents for her in those parades. And we do online. We have petitions and information cards and stickers and buttons and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, she actually had a really good record in the Air Force, did she not?
She was great. Everybody loved her.
Yeah.
And some of the people who are supporting her now are, former people who served with her. So
That's good to hear.
there's no question that she's a smart young woman who loves America and loves her job, even though she doesn't want to be part of the quote unquote killing machine, going forward.
Yeah.
But
it was an immediately transferable skill that she came out of the military with.
So it's bewildering to her and her family to have a judge decide that she quote unquote hates America and needs to be held in jail without bail.
Yeah.
When there's absolutely nothing of substance to back that up.
Who's the judge? What do we know about the judge?
Well, they're both in Augusta, Georgia. We got a magistrate judge deciding some of these questions, and then there's a chief judge. And I guess the point is that it's not about these judges personally.
Yeah.
We disagree with with their
the
rulings, and we're appealing those rulings. But we're going to be making a lot of arguments in front of these two judges, and we want to be nice to them.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me be nice to my audience here and offer an opportunity for your own questions and comments. Just wait for Crystal to arrive with the microphone. You got the microphone? There's a question right down front here. And if you would stand up and make it a little easier for our camera operators, that would be great.
So it sounds to me like this information is being held by or that was held by the NSA is information that could be subverting our democracy. Is there any effort by the lawyers to go on attack? In other words, ask for additional disclosure so that you could put the NSA themselves on trial in a way?
Well,
Thanks.
So we're talking about all this stuff about secret evidence, and that is why the secret evidence rules exist. So we can't do that. So we can't talk about the bigger picture of why this stuff was hidden in the first place. If the government's allowed to win what's called these ex parte rulings, and ex parte is simply Latin for one side, meaning the prosecution gets to see it, but the defense doesn't. So you have a trial where the prosecution gets to look at evidence, the defense just has to take their word for it. They exist, right? So if we lose all these ex parte rulings and orders, then there's no way that we could even begin to talk about the bigger picture of why this was in the public good to be released. Why was it classified in the first place? Every year, the amount of classified information in the United States like doubles, right? So there's exponential growth. Like a few decades ago, there was like thousands, and today there's like tens of millions every year of classified documents that we can't see. There are 1 million people in the United States with access to this classified information that have secret and top secret clearance. We're talking 1 million Americans. So some of this stuff is not that critical, if you're allowing 1 million people to look at it. But it allows the government to be very selective in cases like this to say, we're going to prosecute this young woman, but she's not going to actually get a chance to defend herself in any meaningful way.
Okay. Any other questions in the audience? Come on, audience, don't sit there quietly. Okay, thank you. Hold the mic right up to your mouth.
Right up to my mouth. Okay, so there is obviously a trust in the country that this woman had for going into the military and a belief that this system might work. And then she was exposed to maybe the corruption or the underbelly of what was actually happening. So I'm wondering if you could enlighten us a little bit on kind of what the solution to this would be of somebody who kind of sees what is not right and trying to empower themselves to say, hey, this is what's really happening. But the accusation or the persecution of actually doing that coming from the filter of being in the military. I don't know how to end the question, but speaking to that maybe.
Well, I do talk to her, so I feel like I have some kind of insight. We don't talk about what she may or may not be guilty of, but she was in the military, and then she realized that, killing wasn't the answer, but she wasn't exactly sure what else the answer was. And she took this job with the NSA to sort of, basically get some money for a little bit in order to do some kind of, she had this general idea that she wanted to be some kind of humanitarian mission somewhere in the world, or the Peace Corps or something like this. So what I'm trying to say is she was an idealistic young person, and I would hope that most young people are idealistic people, right? You're figuring out what you're going to be when you grow up, and what you stand for, and things are changing all the time.
Yeah.
So, but what's the answer? We have a system. Right after Reality was placed in jail without bail, Donald Trump announced, celebrated National Whistleblower Day, with a straight face. Obviously, we know Trump and his jokes and not. But the whistleblower statutes that protect whistleblowers, they're basically for people to expose contractors who are ripping off the government. They're like, this guy is, charging you too many pennies for this widget or something like that.
Right.
And they don't cover anything regarding national security. And we're not talking about nuclear codes. We're talking about these tens of millions of documents that are deemed to be classified every year. And if you look back at what the rules are governing classified information, a document cannot be classified unless it would cause demonstrable harm to the government if it was released. And yet, we know the vast majority of documents just simply don't meet that criteria. And how do we know that? Because we can look at the 500,000 documents Edward Snowden exposed. We can look at the 350,000 documents Chelsea Manning exposed. And yet the government can't point to a single person that was killed by the release of this information. Nearly close to 1 billion secret documents. Each one of them was supposed to be, demonstrably harmful to the government, and you can't show that harm.
Yeah, it seems like the only harm that's happening here is the reputational harm to the people in the government that are doing these
Sure.
surveillance programs.
Sure, and we mentioned this, that people within the Trump administration intentionally leak classified information to the press every day, insofar it drives the administration's agenda.
Right.
And then people like Petraeus, who are Washington insiders, if they're caught, doing very similar things, get a slap on the wrist. But yet, for the not powerful, the working class whistleblower, your life is over, and that's what Trump's telling us.
As part of what you do with Courage to Resist, are you also do you work with any members of Congress to try to strengthen whistleblower existing laws or new legislation to cover some of these? Or I know there's a National Whistleblower Center or something. Are they trying to?
We're working coalitions. There are whistleblower organizations out there. Whisper is one. There's National Whistleblower Association. And then we're working, especially with the Reality Winner case, with election integrity organizations. Who, Reality Winner. She didn't like Donald Trump, right? And she was more than likely trying to hold him accountable. And that's very hard to do, we know. But we should still try.
we should definitely
and she's
try.
paying the price for that. But these organizations are relatively small. Courage to Resist is relatively small. So we work in these coalitions, and sure, there are some. There are a small number of Congress people that are sympathetic to us. But I don't know. Anyways, we could see what's happening in Congress today.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of friends at this point.
Yeah. And how? Any more questions out here in the audience? All right. I think this will probably be the last one. Running out of time here.
I don't know if you can really call this a serious question, but I mean, I look at this situation, and reality winner is in jail in Georgia for trying to hold the government accountable. I mean, is this like, you know, the whole sentence works together as kind of a microcosm of like what's wrong with this country? And I mean, like, could this be part of an integrated Southern, the South will rise again kind of strategy?
I have no idea. But I would say, you know, as far as you can make puns all day of reality and winner, and it's impossible to even talk about this case, you know, without, you know, coming across a reality winner pun.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But anyways, so I guess one thing is like we're not talking about a hacker that took on a fake name or something like that. We're talking about, you know, a young woman from Texas who tried to do the right thing, and the Trump administration is pulling no stops to make an example to future whistleblowers.
So what's next? There's a lot more jockeying back and forth, basically getting the ground rules set for the trial.
Exactly. So the legal teams are going back and forth, and as far as like our public education program, last week we had Manafort and Gates be indicted. Next week I expect Flynn and his son to be indicted from this, and yet my concern is reality winner simply fades into the background and is forgotten. You know, while the rich and powerful in Washington, you know, their indictments stack up. They're allowed to defend themselves in the media about how unfair all this stuff is. That their associated crimes shouldn't be tied to the Russiagate stuff like that. Yeah. So my job is, in part, to make sure people don't forget about reality winner as the media shifts its attention to the rich and powerful in D.C.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this program. I've been following the case, and I've been following your work for many years, and you pick a lot of important cases, and this seems like a really important one.
Some people
me,
think I pick the hard cases. There's some attorneys that only take cases that they're sure they can win. Sometimes I feel like I only take cases that I expect to lose.
You're almost bound to lose.
But there's something to be said for that, right? If you have nothing to lose, then you can fight. You know, you can fight the best fight you can.
All right.
But
we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time.
Chelsea
My guest
Manning,
has been Jeff Patterson of
Thank you.
Courage to Resist. One more word?
Well, Chelsea Manning's Freedom Today proves that we do win sometimes, and that's what we'll do with Reality Winner.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Jeff Patterson. Thank you all for being here. Good night.